Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 25th. It is the 10 o'clock hour. The Board of Supervisors of the County of Del Norte and the governing body of all of their special assessment and taxing districts for which said board so acts is now meeting in regular session. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at the assigned time. All other items may be taken out of sequence to accommodate the public and staff availability. We're going to take a moment of reflection. Oh, wait a minute. Kylie, would you take roll, please? Call the meeting to order and take roll.
Supervisor Howard?
Here.
Supervisor Cowan?
Here.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Here.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Here.
Chair Hemmingson?
Here. Now we're going to take a moment of reflection. Okay, and now if you'll all please stand. Supervisor Berkowitz, would you please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Introduction of new employees. Jay?
I don't believe we have any at this meeting, but we do anticipate one at the next meeting.
Okay. Joel, any action from closed session?
There is nothing to report.
Thank you. At this time, I would request any deletions, corrections, or additions from board members to the agenda. In order to add an item to the agenda, the matter must have come to the attention of the county subsequent to the posting of the agenda, and the matter requires action before the next regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Are there any such items? Okay, hearing none, we are going to receive brief reports from supervisors, and we're going to start with Supervisor Berkowitz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Monday, the Crescent City Del Norte County Chamber of Commerce held an emergency meeting to endorse both Measure S and Measure R, which will be voted on in November. Measure S would impose a 1% sales tax on city residents, and Measure R would do the same for county residents. Mayor Inscore spoke in favor of Measure S and what it would do for the city, and I spoke on Measure R and what it would mean for the county. The Chamber of Commerce ended up endorsing both measures. Last Thursday, Chairman Hemmingson and I attended a future facilities meeting where we discussed the Home Key, which is a federal program which will provide funds to house the homeless and to separate those with COVID-19. $17 million is available to 22 counties, and the timeline for application to the program is short. Yesterday, Supervisor Gitlin and I attended the Redwood Coast Transit Authority meeting where we approved the 2020 service plan. We also adopted a resolution 2020-21-02 authorizing acceptance of the CARE Act Phase 2 funding. And yesterday, Mr. Gitlin and I attended a LAFCO meeting where we adopted a resolution authorizing the Hunter Creek Services District to take over the recreation area in Klamath from the county. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attended the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority board meeting with Supervisor Cowan. Also had several conversations from concerned residents in Big Flat concerning fire risk from increased camping opportunities up the South Fork of the Smith River. Spoke with Jeff Marzell concerning those measures, and Forest Service is taking active pursuit of fires that could threaten both property and homes in that area to ensure that people are abiding by the rules of the forest, and recently has banned all outdoor fires within that area. Had some communication as well with the remainder of the board on the Rezaghini Rancheria's proposal concerning its interest in state rights as it's in accordance with the EPA language of Section 303C. Hopefully we'll be addressing that in the near future. Also have some constituents with the Dish Network and their retraction of local television stations, both CBS and NBC. Had a preparatory meeting for a conversation with the set up by the Small Business Administration and the company called Square, which does a lot of online transactions for private business. And then had some discussions with both Joel and board members from the Historic Society over concerns with the lighthouse. In addition, had some discussions with Jana Balakovic, again, from the University Cooperative Extension, with issues in District 3 concerning Sudden Oak death. And then finally, I'd like to give a shout out to all our supervisor, friends, and family in the regions affected by wildfires right now. It is absolutely catastrophic for the state. I know Sonoma has been hit very hard. We pray for you in this time of need and your property and your family's lives. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Gitlin.
Yes, thank you. As was mentioned at LAFCO's meeting yesterday, we did adopt the resolution for the Hunter Valley Community Service Park and Recreation Service to activate recreation and park services. It's currently a water district only. So the Hunter Valley APN will be transferred for those services within the district only, within the Hunter Valley district only. The cost to the taxpayers is a modest $3 a month. It was a unanimous vote. Redwood Coast Transit Authority, as was mentioned, is looking in pretty good shape financially. The estimated COVID-related costs are estimated to be between $750,000 to $900,000 and will be reimbursed by the CARES Act. The authority currently enjoys a surplus of about $500,000. So I asked for a future agenda item to be placed to discuss have a discussion on purchasing an electric vehicle. That seems to be the way of the future. The authority directors, including myself, are unfamiliar with the cost of such a vehicle or its maintenance and the suitability to Del Norte County. So we need to learn a little bit more about that before we move forward in having further discussions, and that will be provided by the Redwood Coast Transit Authority folks to us. Our PIC program is now entering its 7th week, Pride in Community. We assist the city in maintaining city-owned curbs, sidewalks, and gutters. Recognition to now community sponsors, Les Schwab Tires, California Auto Image, Porta Pints, and Tab Commercial Properties, who have contributed an employee and a gas weed trimmer to help beautify the iconic areas around Howe Drive, at the harbor, Kidtown, the pool. And this Wednesday, tomorrow, we will address the overgrowth on Skateboard Hill at Preston Island. Apparently, there's going to be a commercial film shoot, and the city's asked for some volunteers to help clean up that area so we show our best face forward. We always use more volunteers, and if you are interested, join us tomorrow and every Wednesday through Sea Cruise weekend at 10 a.m. at the Lighthouse parking lot. Your efforts will assist the city in addressing possible budget challenges due to the COVID-19 virus shutting down the transient occupancy tax during the first quarter of 2020. I had the opportunity to study our finances and gain a better understanding of the impact of the COVID virus on Del Norte County. We are all aware that on the November ballot, there'll be a measure to increase the general sales tax a full 1%. Both city residents, of which I am one, and county voters will vote on that. And if passed, this would derive approximately $1.2 million in additional revenue for both the city and the county respectively. The increase will also drive more of you folks north to Brookings to buy your gas, tires, appliances, and other big and small ticket items. So what I've learned, there are 3 pools of money to address the COVID-19 virus for cities and counties, including Del Norte. The Office of Emergency Services and FEMA money are reimbursable from the state, Sacramento, and the federal, Washington, D.C., respectively. The second pool is the Paycheck Protection Plan, also known as PPP, and those funds, again, are reimbursable from Washington, D.C. The third pool of money comes from the Federal CARES Act, and many of you have received payments to offset financial hardships because of the virus. Del Norte County has received approximately $400,000 from the $2.78 million promised funding. There has been some discussion about suspending this balance, about $2.38 million, but this is discussion only, and this being an election year, I would believe it's unlikely Washington will renege on the balance due to our county. If those funds come through, the balance of those funds, $2.38 million, Del Norte County will be very financially healthy, which would address the necessity of adding an onerous 1% sales tax to our citizens. I'll be keeping you informed on the 1% increase in the coming weeks so that you, the voter, can make an intelligent and informed decision. And of course, the California endowment billboards, it's indeed disheartening to see the endowment ignoring polite and respectful requests to modify or remove its political statements on 2 of its outdoor displays, including its support of the Black Lives Matter group, arguably a violent, divisive, anti-family, anti-Semitic hate group. Clearly, one size does not fit all and does not apply to this not-for-profit 501c3 health advocate who continues to wade into this area of divisive politics. Such behavior violates the restrictions of the IRS code governing 501c3 requirements. I may be alone on this Board of Supervisors expressing my displeasure on behalf of the thousands of Del Norters who have summarily been excluded from these moniker messages. In fact, one sign was actually defaced, the one on the harbor. The middle figure of the 7 messages was defaced with the intimidating stencil-applied clenched fist. Is this the message the endowment tacitly approves? If not, then remove the offensive signage. The continued display of this message, as well as other characters' monikers, does not reflect the values of our community, and the endowment's continued permission to have the message displayed is insulting and divisive. Political correctness should not guide our values. The matter is far from over. And that is my report.
Vice Chair Cowan.
Thank you, Chairman. As Supervisor Howard mentioned, we had a Solid Waste Authority meeting and discussed just moving forward with contract negotiations with Recology. Had a meeting with Heather Snow, Supervisor Hemmingson, CAO Serena, along with County Council regarding home key funding. I've had a few conversations regarding that, and that's all homeless housing, and money is coming down, one-time funding through the state. Had some conversations with a constituent around the Postal Service and what's going on with them and how it might affect us locally. Had several calls and concerns around our first COVID death in our community, and I want to express my condolences to the family. Also want to thank Alan and the maintenance department for item 7 that is on today's consent agenda. It's definitely needed, so thank you very much, Alan, for taking care of that. And also on today's agenda is acceptance of some funds from Wild Rivers Foundation. Was working really hard earlier in the year to make sure we had a shower program going during this time, which it has been going, and we were getting some funding and will continue to get funding from Wild Rivers Foundation to help with those expenses. The shower program is important and it has been successful, and we need to do whatever it takes to make sure it's moving forward. Also, I want to echo Supervisor Howard's words as far as all of our fellow supervisors, families, friends, and everybody down south of us who are going through these fires. They're absolutely devastating. I personally drove through them yesterday, and it was like going through the apocalypse. It's just horrible to see what everybody is going through. So my heart goes out to all family and friends who are dealing with this. And that's it for me.
Yes, thank you. I had a few meetings, RCRC meeting, which usually lasts 4 or 5 hours, and this one probably lasted close to 6. A lot of discussion on upcoming legislation as well as CARES Act money. As Supervisor Cowan stated, we had a meeting with staff about home key funding and no place like home stuff. So that's ongoing discussions. Had a Dungeness crab fishing gear innovations webinar. Did a gender review. Had a whale working group risk assessment plan meeting. And as Supervisor Berkowitz said, we had a future facilities meeting about the home key issue also. And I would like to echo both what Supervisor Howard and Cowan stated about the fires. These areas like Sonoma County and Napa that keep getting hit with these fires over and over again. It's not a good situation, and I really feel for those people that have to go through that again. And that's it for me. So at this time, I think we'll take up the consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda, Chairman.
Thank
Second.
you. I have a motion and a motion by Supervisor Cowan, seconded by Supervisor Berkowitz. And I will ask for public comment.
Chair, I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds.
Sure.
I'm not seeing any public comment online at this time.
Okay, would you please poll the vote then?
Supervisor Howard,
Yes, and I'll recuse myself on item number 4.
Supervisor Gitlin,
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz,
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. And within that consent agenda, there is a proclamation proclaiming September as Suicide Awareness and Prevention Plus Action Month. Whereas suicidal thoughts can affect anyone regardless of age, gender, race, orientation, income level, region, or background. And suicide is a major public health issue that requires vigilant attention and preventative action. And whereas the Del Norte County suicide rate was 2.5 times higher than the average California county. And whereas suicide is the second leading cause of death in California for 15 to 34-year-olds. And whereas each death by suicide directly impacts numerous family members, friends, loved ones, and by extension, the entire community. And whereas every member of our community should understand that throughout life's struggles, we all need the occasional reminder that we are silently fighting our own battles, especially during this pandemic. And whereas reducing the stigma by discussing suicide and warning signs, promoting safe and responsible care of lethal means, and increasing public awareness of the resources available for at-risk individuals, encourages help-seeking behaviors and helps attempt survivors of suicide loss in their personal healing. And whereas it is important to recognize the connection that mental health conditions and substance use disorders have to suicide, as well as how other external factors, including harassment, bullying, discrimination, and the availability of a firearm contribute. And whereas Know that asking for help is a sign of real strength and the first step towards achieving mental wellness, particularly during this extended period of COVID-19 pandemic. And now, therefore, the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims September 20th as Suicide Awareness and Prevention Plus Action Month. Be it further resolved that the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors encourage all citizens to learn the warning signs, trust their gut, and use the information to ask a troubled friend, colleague, or family member. Are you okay? Passed and adopted this 25th day of August 2020 by unanimous vote. Okay, is Gordon on, Kylie, to speak to this?
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Gordon, you are on. It looks like you just need to unmute your mic. You're good to go.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Gordon Clay of Brookings, Oregon. August is Overdose Awareness Month. Bear with me. According to the New York, England Journal of Medicine, accidental drug overdoses and deaths by suicide have increased at an extreme rate during the early days of this pandemic. Suspected overdoses nationally jumped 18% in March of this year, 29% in April, and 42% in May. Data from ambulance teams, hospitals, and police. A growing number of overdoses now occur in suburban and non-suburban settings, often in affluent neighborhoods. According to the 2014 study, drug users most often at risk for overdose are white, middle-aged men, suburban men. The highest overdose death rate in 2015 represented people between the ages of 45 and 54. The good news is overdoses are 100% preventable. Get help if you need it, and don't let yourself or someone you love become an overdose or suicide statistic. Sidebar, I encourage the opening of AA meetings as soon as possible. In the meantime, I venture that more people will die from drug overdose while meetings are closed than die from COVID-19. September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Plus Action Month. Suicide is at an all-time high. In 2017 analysis, the CDC broke down the categories such as cancer into separate cancers and then listed the top 50 leading causes of death. In California, as mentioned, suicide was the second leading cause of death for 15 to 24 and 35 to 44-year-olds, the third leading cause for 25 to 34-year-olds, and the fourth leading cause of death for 45 to 54-year-olds. We also know that suicide in rural Northern California is much higher than the rest of the state. 90% of the people who die by suicide have demonstrated warning signs, but their friends never picked up on them. Especially during this pandemic, don't be one of those friends. Learn the risk factors and warning signs and what to do when you're around a friend, neighbor, colleague, or family member who is showing those signs, and ask with confidence, are you okay? And let them know it's okay to say, I'm not okay. That conversation could change their life, and it might change yours too. Together we can change the conversation around by countering myths and fear with information and action steps everyone can take. We all have a role to play in suicide prevention, not only during the months of August and September, but all year long. And thank you for, as a council, for approving this proclamation.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Appreciate all the work that you do on this. It's a pretty important issue, and thank you for bringing it before us again. Okay, we're going to move on to the public comment period. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes up that matter. We will limit you to 3 minutes. Kylie, is there any public comment?
Chair, I have 2 written and I have somebody raising their hand online. Which one would you like to take up first?
Let's take the hand raiser first.
Okay.
Craig Strong.
You are on.
Hi, yeah, this is Craig Strong, Crescent City. When the responsible person for getting the consent agenda item 7 for the dog waste stations on your agenda, and I want to thank you for approving that. So we'll go ahead with implementing it and putting up the stations as soon as I purchase them. And the only thing is if some county staff want to come out with us when we're installing them to make sure that they're done as the county would like to do it, we can do that, but I'll communicate with Alan about if you want county staff present when we're putting them up. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment via Zoom?
Yes. Linda, you are on.
Good morning. I'd just like to remind the people of Del Norte County that it was just a few short weeks ago that Supervisor Howard said we needed to increase sales tax because of COVID. And he knew the county would be receiving $463,000 for COVID. 4 of you on this board are red. And yet you hold, let me see here. You hold values, you're supposed to hold values of the red party. However, that's not how you vote. Only 1 of you votes red. This is an atrocity when you can't trust your party to vote the right way. Mr. Berkowitz, you put your middle finger up in the air to see which way the wind is blowing, which determines how you vote, screwing the very party that elected you. This is a great disappointment how you folks are handling the people's business. I personally am not enjoying communism here in our county, being forced to wear a mask when there's nothing that supports a pandemic. Even Dr. Raywall said the person who died allegedly of COVID had underlying medical conditions, which means that's probably what the cause of death is. But maybe he tested positive, so now, or he was near someone who tested positive, so they're going to count it as COVID. This is outrageous. Let's open up our county. You're making our businesses suffer. You're making our children suffer, and you are very blatant that you don't give a damn. Thank you.
Kylie, anything else?
No more online, but I do have 2 written.
Okay, let's hear those.
One is from Jessica Harrell. This actually came in for last week's public comment, but it was sent to the city by mistake. So I wanted to read it. And it says, I urge the board to recognize that all lives do matter until Black Lives Matter. I urge the board to make a statement to admonish Gitlin's actions. I do not request anyone to try to affect his actions, but simply to make the strongest statement possible against his intention to cause division and pain. That's it for that one. And I got a rather longer one from a Jeff McCadden. And it says, this comment is specifically directed to the Honorable Supervisors Cowan, Hemmingson, and Howard in regard to inciting public protests against Supervisor Gitlin during the previous meeting. I wish to add the following observations on his behalf for the record. Our words in his defense aloud. If it is the intent of this exalted political forum to suspend open rational discourse in the face of Marxist dogma and emotional self-righteous indignation, then your incitement of protest is well-founded. The litany of angry epithets hurled at Mr. Gitlin by your mob of self-aggrandized speech police was entertained by your majestic board with relish, as well as it should have been. To tarnish upon the supreme body's thin patina of respectability by the words of your fellow supervisor must have been a source of unimaginable embarrassment and anguish. In truth, if the three of you had tails, they would have been wagging. This was your opportunity to remove an opponent of the popular Maoist front group, Black Lives Matter. You are an exceedingly proud band of sublime politicians, and any politician worth their salt will sway to the loud voice of the public, no matter how hypocritical, illogical, or unjust their criticism may be. Speaking of pride, there are extremes of pride that in ancient times were considered a crime. The daughter of the Greek god Poseidon was charged with carrying out the punishment of this crime. The name of the goddess was Nemesis, and she was the power who executed the judgment against young Narcissus for spurning the love of Venus. The sentences executed by Nemesis upon her offenders always had a distinct element of irony. The unlucky Narcissus, who prided himself as being the most beautiful of creatures, was left to starve while gazing enwrapped at the beauty of his own reflection in a still pond. The reason I mention an old mythic story to this very proud and lofty body of august politicians should be obvious. Greek mythology is directly related to definitions of deviant behavior in psychology. After all, Freud named the study of psychology itself after the Greek Psyche, goddess of the soul. From the story above, we find the origin of the psychopathic trait of narcissism. Psychopathic soul disease characterized by egocentric, self-serving behavior, bereft of empathy, compassion, and conscience. This is an example of self-pride to take a godlike extreme. In ancient times, it was known as the crime of hubris, a mortal crime against the gods. I expect that this noble assembly will continue to do what most politicians would do. Regardless of ethics, and in the face of showing any personal honor or true moral courage, most politicians will take the popular path of least resistance. Yet, to wade through the ocean of most politicians' souls would scarce get your feet wet. Sincerely, Mr. Jeff L. McCadden. And that's the two written that I had.
That's it? No other public comment?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised online, and I didn't have any other written.
Okay, great, thank you. So we will close the public comment and we will move on to our next 10:30 timed item, which is Dr. Warren Raywalt, our public health officer, give us an update. Dr. Raywalt.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, I have a fairly brief update, I think, today. Hopefully leave some time for questions. I'm sure you're all following the national numbers. Hang on a second, I'm going to put my video on. There we go. Locally, our last posted numbers were from last Friday. We've had a few extra cases added to that, so our actual total of confirmed cases is 121. I think we have 15 active cases right now. And of course, since the last meeting, we unfortunately had our first Del Norte resident pass away from COVID, which was news to everybody. And as we point out, kind of a milestone for the community. Overall, I think we're doing about what we expected for this time of the year in the summer. We've been seeing sort of a steady low-level trickle of cases coming in. A lot of our cases are still people who turn positive because we've asked them to go get tested. We still have roughly over 50% of our cases are of that nature, which we still think is a good sign because that implies that our case investigation and contact tracing is still doing pretty well. The biggest other item of news that I wanted to let the board know about is we've been working for a while now on trying to partner up with Humboldt County and United Health Services to expand local testing capacity. We all know that the closest public health lab for COVID testing is in Humboldt. And they have been pretty much operating at maximum capacity for the whole pandemic. They've had some equipment improvement that they did on their own, but recently they've developed we didn't develop it. We took advantage of an opportunity that was developed by the state of California to get extra equipment brought in essentially free of charge to expand lab capacity even further. The trouble with public health lab in Humboldt is they're pretty cramped for space. So what they've decided to do is partner up with United Health Services. And because United Health Services spans both counties, they wanted to take us on as partners too. And we jumped at the chance because the beauty of this arrangement is by doing our testing locally, we save all the time and effort of shipping things out to labs, sometimes at the other end of the state. We've been exploring that other option as well for the county, trying to figure out if there was a reliable lab service that we could count on, that we could ship to, that we could draw specimens from throughout the county. But the cost is pretty high, and the turnaround time is increased by doing that route. So this solution of doing this locally by partnering with the public health departments of the two counties and United Indian Health Services seems to be the best solution for everybody. It certainly improves access for all the residents of the county, and it improves services for the tribes within the counties. We think it's a win-win kind of scenario. So it passed kind of a big milestone this last week because we got approval from one of the chief officials at CDPH to proceed with this plan. And we were kind of waiting on that. And so we've been kind of keeping it low key in the background, not talking about it too much until we had some assurance that that was going to take place. And now that that has happened, now it's a matter of coordinating our efforts and getting things set up and taking the next steps. There's still ways that it could turn out to not work out, but I'm pretty confident right now from what I've heard and what we've been talking about that this plan is going to be able to go through, and it'll be a big benefit for everybody. You know, the turnaround time would probably be down to a day or maybe 2 days at the most, just for any kind of public health screening lab. And that's a huge improvement compared to what other places have been dealing with, especially with the state mandated Verily site, where we've had, you know, extraordinarily long turnaround times in the past. That site too has gotten a lot better, but it's not as useful as we'd like it to be. And so we think this testing solution is going to help quite a bit. I did want to say that we still are seeing pretty much the same pattern of our cases, mostly related to travelers, either people from Del Norte traveling out of the community or inviting family or friends into the community, and gatherings. And we still think that those need to be uppermost in people's minds, that those are the risky environments right now. You know, private gatherings, public gatherings are supposed to happen. Private gatherings aren't really supposed to happen either, but certainly if people are going to do that, I just want to remind them that the best solution is keep whatever gathering you're planning or participating in, keep it as small as possible, because the risk increases with the more people that you invite and the more people that participate. The best thing is to not do that at all, but realizing that that's a little bit unrealistic for most people. We're trying to put some reasonable parameters on it. So we keep saying 10 or less. We are hearing some news from the state that they might be kind of reconsidering what they're saying about gatherings as well. So there'll be more news on that front, I think, within the next few weeks. But that's been the pattern this last month. Lots of traffic in and out of the community. And some of our cases are travel related. Some are because of people just getting together. The last item of news that you probably have all heard about is there was, and I'm just going to cover it now because I'm sure I'm going to get questions about it. There was a couple of cases that showed up connected to Castle Rock. We've been in contact with them. We were working most of the day yesterday. Our nursing staff was working to help them increase awareness and also do some additional testing of staff and take some other precautionary measures. So it's news, not entirely unexpected. Actually, in a way, it's kind of a good thing that it happened now rather than, you know, a few weeks from now when all the students are back in classrooms. It's much easier to deal with when it's a staff outbreak. So we think that's going to turn out to be fairly easy to contain. We don't know for sure yet, but you know, we've been working with them for since yesterday morning for sure, and actually since last Friday. So I think I'll stop there. I don't have much else on the horizon. The hospital has been fairly steady in activity, no current inpatient admissions. And I think that's the status right now.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Ray. Well, I did want to ask you, where is the United Indian Health Lab going to be located? Is that in Humboldt County also?
Yes, they have a moderate complexity. I think it's a moderate complexity lab. That's the rating system for labs at the Public Health Village in Humboldt. That's where they've been doing, and they've been doing a lot of testing. In fact, they've been offering antibody testing, serum antibody testing for essential workers for quite some time for anybody who wanted to avail themselves of that. And they have current capacity to do in-house testing, which is a good thing. But they've really stepped up to improve their lab service, and partnering with them allows both counties to really improve lab service across the board. So it's a good solution. Great.
How confident can we be in the results now with these antibody testing since you brought that up? Are they doing any better with that?
Antibody or antigen? Those are two different things. So antibody is serum antibody. Antigen testing is the one where you swab your nose and then you get the result back in 15 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the antibody testing.
Yeah, the serum antibody testing, not a lot has changed. And again, we've talked about this before. It has to do with how active the disease is in your community and how many people have been infected, how reliable the results are. The antigen testing, where they are measuring for the proteins in the virus being present in your nose or somewhere else when they do that test, that test is not as reliable as the PCR test. The PCR test is super sensitive and very specific, but I think the tests are getting better. I think we're going to get some more information about that in the next month or so. I know there's another test of that group that was approved very recently. It might have been even this last week. And so I think we're going to see some expansion on that front. And I think also over the short term and definitely the long term for the duration of this pandemic, that's the route that it's going to go in the end, because that's what can be done conveniently in doctors' offices. It's like a strep screen or one of those similar kinds of tests you get in a doctor's office. And in the end, I think that's going to be replacing a lot of what we're doing right now. But for right now, PCR is still the standard that we go by because it's so good at picking up even, mildly infectious cases. So that's really what we're looking for from a public health standpoint.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, Bob?
Dr. Earl, you say that most cases are out of the area. What percentage of those cases do you think, compared to local, are out of the area?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. If it's Del Norte's traveling out of the area versus other people coming in.
People coming in.
Our recent experience, I'm guessing anywhere between 20 and 35%. So maybe roughly, a quarter to a third. It's hard to put a number on that because sometimes we're not entirely sure. We just have a strong suspicion. So I'd probably stick to maybe 25%. It'd be a reasonable estimate.
And a second question is the nose swab versus saliva. What are we using here?
Well, the best test is the NP swab, nasopharyngeal. So that's the one where they stick the swab way, way back in your nose and scrape the back of your airway. Next best test is the mid-turbinate swab. That's the one that it gets stuck in about halfway in your nose. That's the one they do at the Verily test site. Both of those are uncomfortable. The first one's much worse than the second. The easiest nasal swab is to swab the end of the nose. And that's really the direction that we're going in the future. And that's one of the other nice things about our new testing capacity with UHS once it gets up and running. All types of swabs. The saliva swab is the simplest, but from what I've read so far, I haven't read anything recently about this, so I may be a little bit out of date. The reliability is not as good as the nasal swabs. So it's an easy way for someone to self-test and send in, and people have done some of those tests around the country. But it's just harder to know what the results mean if it's positive or negative, especially if it's negative.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions from board members?
Yes, Dr. Raywalk, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Lots of folks we know in Crescent City are going out dining in Brookings, going out to dinner, and dining in, and we don't have that privilege to do that here in Del Norte County as yet. Can you address this when that restriction may be relieved and people can dine in and help our local businesses develop a healthier business prospect.
Yeah, I don't remember if I mentioned this last time, but we've been working as a local health officer group in Northern California. We came up with a position paper on this and submitted to the state. I think it's been almost 3 weeks ago now. We've asked for some feedback a couple times. Our position was that it was a bit over the top to impose this on counties where we hadn't proven any contacts or any proven cases arising from dining in. I mean, it'd be different if we had traced something back to a restaurant event and had, multiple cases show up from that, but it has not been the case in our county, hasn't been in the case in any of the surrounding counties. And, we're all similarly situated, low population density, remote and rural. So we put that into a position paper, sent it off to the state. We may not hear anything directly back, but I do know that there's been some discussion at the state to modify this. And I think we're hearing signs that it may be coming down the road in the near future. So I'm going to just ask people to stay tuned because we'd like to get it lifted. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us as health officers. There are certainly times when focusing in on a particular restaurant, especially if they're not doing things very well, that would make sense if we traced cases back to them. But to do this across the board, it just didn't make a lot of sense to any of us. So we wrote about it and we sent it into the state.
I appreciate you can follow up again. And the follow up to that question is, for the benefit of the audience who's listening, what are the other restrictions that are currently activated that you anticipate will be relaxed shortly? I heard you mention a few, but are there any others that you have not gone over? I think gymnasiums, things like that.
Yeah. The things that keep coming up a lot that we haven't had a chance to discuss as a group, but we've mentioned it on some of our calls, are things like playgrounds, outdoor play areas for kids, stuff like that. We just want more clarity. We also have a lot of health officers around the state are asking for just a general guidance for gatherings or groups together that would fit lots of different venues. So in other words, what's the distinction between, say, a gathering for a club event, or a gathering for a religious event, or a gathering for a specific celebration? And as long as the basic parameters of size and using common sense hygiene and face masks and things like that, as long as those are in place, just treating them all equally. That's one of the things that we would like to see, because it makes it a lot easier rather than trying to define rules for every specific kind of thing out there in the world. It makes more sense to have more of a general rule that people can follow. So that's one of the other things that we've been talking about and asking a little bit. Right now, the big issue for us is what to do about school opening, and especially about flu season coming up. And, we're trying to really come up with a position paper that encourages people to get flu vaccination, for example, especially this year, because we really want to take flu out of the picture going into flu season as much as we can, because we're quite confident they're going to have flu and COVID going on at the same time. There's no reason to expect otherwise. And getting people vaccinated for flu helps in a lot of ways. Now, having said that, we're also seeing signs that the flu season in other parts of the world where it should be active right now has been fairly low activity. And probably a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are wearing masks and using social distance and staying at home more. So there's less chance for flu to become a big problem. But we're trying to make sure that it doesn't become a problem at all, because that really complicates things for COVID for the rest of the year.
Thank you.
Dr. Raywalker, since you brought up the flu vaccine, does that flu vaccine change from the beginning? Like I've heard that the flu vaccine is available now. Does it change any time between now and after the first of the year?
It usually doesn't. It could be modified. Sometimes strains are added, but usually it's based on the active strains going on in the southern hemisphere at the beginning of, or what was occurring last year in the northern hemisphere. And that's what they project as being the likely culprits for the next flu season. So they put they designed the vaccine that way.
Any other questions from board members? Any public comment, Kylie?
Chair, I'm just gonna give it a couple more seconds. And I'm not seeing any public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Revol. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Thank you all. Talk to you later.
All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to our regular items under general government. Approve an ordinance making non-substantive technical corrections and renumbering of the county code and removing inoperable chapters, and designate county council to prepare a summary of the ordinance for publication as requested by county council. Joel?
Thank you, Chair. This is the ordinance that we introduced at the last board meeting. This is on for final approval. It is just a series of small adjustments and corrections to non-substantive issues in the code, most specifically adding some of the parking ordinances that haven't been codified yet because of the renumbering issue. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, that's it.
Okay, any questions from board members? Okay, I'll be looking for a motion.
Make that motion, Mr. Chairman, to approve an ordinance making non-substantive technical corrections and renumbering the county code and removing inoperable chapters, and designate county council to prepare a summary of the ordinance for publication.
Second,
Okay, so I have a motion by Supervisor Gitlin, seconded by Supervisor Berkowitz. Is there public comment, Kylie?
I'm not seeing any, but I'm just gonna give it a little bit more time.
Okay,
And I'm not seeing any public comment at this time, Chair.
okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions from board members? Kylie, please poll the vote.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan,
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz,
yes,
Supervisor Gitlin,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Okay, moving on to legislative and budget issues. Item number 13, which is to review and approve an expenditure plan. Jay? Oh, maybe, yeah, Jay. No, or maybe
Yes.
Mr. Shad.
It'll be me, and
Okay.
Mr. Shad is available if there are questions. So in the report that was submitted to the board, this speaks to the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act funding. That's the CARES Act funding that I'll refer to. This is funding that is allocated through the state of California after receipt by the state from the federal government. And it is to address the response to the coronavirus pandemic by those counties that didn't receive direct allocations previously, which were those counties that were over 500,000 in population. As previously mentioned, yes, this is coming down through the state of California as an allocation. The state has chosen to do that in 6 equal increments. We've received our first. In late July, we were notified that we needed to certify for the receipt of the funds, and that they would be spent consistent with the CARES Act, as well as that the county would be in compliance with the governor's executive orders. And I believe the reason for the 6 equal payments is to be able to pull that funding back if in fact a county doesn't comply with those orders, as well as for the state of California to draw interest off of it. But the priorities that are listed in the report before you outline what is allowable and eligible under the CARES Act, and we will be, or we already have started addressing that through individual departments as to what their expenses have been that they're pulling out of their previously approved budget. Not those expenditures are not expected or were not expected. So there are, this offsets those costs and allows those departments then to go back and focus on what they were allocated by the board prior to the pandemic. Some of the things that can be spent on this in more specific terms are payroll for frontline employees. That does not include hazard pay. Expenses related to telework capabilities of the county, including those working from home, as well as IT expenses, personal protective equipment. We did get allocations through the state that did not cost us, but there were also other protective equipment that we had to install and deal with. And that goes into associated facility improvements and disinfection and cleaning. Obviously, we've had to ramp up our staff time specifically for disinfection and cleaning. We haven't been closed from the beginning. So as we go through this, the auditor controller would be authorized by the board to process the necessary budget modifications for the 2021 fiscal year. And we will try to address that as part of the final budget, but there will be changes as these expenses come in and we need to make those necessary adjustments to the budget. So today, this is really a report on the fact that we would receive the money and to essentially prioritize what's eligible under the CARES Act. Many counties have done this. Some have just been a note to the board and others have been full budgets. Obviously, we have a fairly small allocation compared to counties around us. I think Humboldt County was at like $13 million. But there are expenses and we will be using these priorities to take care of those issues as best we can.
Okay. Any questions? Comments? Any public comment, Kylie?
Yes. Linda, you are on.
Hi, thank you. So is the $466,880 the first payment, or is that divided by 6 payments? That's because you said there were 6 payments that are going to be made. Is this one of 6, or is our first payment only $77,000?
That is the initial allocation. There are 6 more payments of that same amount.
Oh, nice. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
I would also, at this point, Chair, like to note that this funding allocation requires that these funds be spent by 12/30 of 2020. These are one-time funds. And while they assist with this budget, it's very limited time that these funds can be used, March 1st to December 30th. And then after that, any expenses that come in, there are no allocations available at this time. A part of these funds can also be used for the county's portion of the Stafford Act FEMA allocation that we will be submitting also. But that is a separate allocation, and there are other qualifying factors as to what the FEMA money can be used for. So this isn't ongoing funding in any way.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. Most of us.
Supervisor Hemmingson, if
Yeah.
I may, I'd like to clarify some statements that were made earlier because I'm scratching my head how these dollars all of a sudden solve our general fund woes, especially as it's related to public safety and our initiative. One of the supervisors spoke up earlier in his report and said all of a sudden this windfall solves these woes from the CARES Act and somehow affects whether or not we even need an initiative to solve basically our ongoing public safety issues and other issues associated with our general fund. So I'm scratching my head right now and hoping CAO Serena could enlighten us just a little on is there an association there? What am I missing, CAO? I'm not sure how our initiative is affected by this CARES Act dollars that are coming around, especially CARES Act dollars that have to be, as you stated, spent by 12/31/2020. I'm not seeing how that affects our ongoing public safety deficit.
Well, there are two different issues for long-term funding and short-term funding. This is short-term funding to offset the coronavirus pandemic and those impacts to those individual budgets. It doesn't offset loss of revenue. I need to clarify that also. That has been discussed at the federal level, but that is not what is in the existing law. So what this can be used for would be to deal with those essential county services that have been provided specific to the pandemic that were not budgeted and were not expected prior to the pandemic. So there are expenses. Currently, we're working with the Department of Health and Human Services, public health in particular, looking at what their expenses are and what might be eligible there. And it's in excess of what the first payment is, first allocation. So you can see that there are impacts that have happened, and we're going to have to then adapt to those and use this funding as prudently as possible. But it is short-term funding. It is one-time funding. It doesn't deal with the future.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chief.
May I address Mr. Howard if he's not still scratching his head? Clint Shad, are you still on board? Because you and I had a very in-depth conversation about the budget. Are you available to answer a question or two that I asked you? Mr. Shad? Well, what I was told, if Mr. Shad can jump in here, and because I get a lot of my information from this, is that, and our tax collector Lopez said our transient occupancy tax is off about 18% due to the first quarter. Everything seems to be operating at full tilt now. So the anticipated losses of up to 500,000 or 600,000 are not going to be realized going into the new year. So I believe the PPP monies affected that compromise where we didn't get all the transient occupancy tax for the county. So as far as the others are concerned, the 2.78 million, which is due, according to my conversation with Mr. Shad, 400,000 already allocated, will make us healthy. So I will defer to the expert on this budget, and if he can enlighten me if it's not correct. We're about to embark on another 1% sales tax increase, which will raise our tax to 8.5%, Mr. Howard. And I'm kind of wondering about where you're going to buy your next set of tires at Les Schwab. Or are you going to drive up to Brookings like so many other people will and buying all kinds of different products, whether it's gasoline, appliances, small or big ticket items? That's going to be a hit on our budget. And the expected $1.2 million coming in will be punitive to many people who just simply can't afford it. So I'd like to see more business coming to our local people rather than going to 26 miles north. You can continue scratching your head.
Yeah, and I'll continue buying my tires from Dan at Del Norte Tire like I have for the last 25 years.
And the others?
Yep. And everyone other.
May I clarify a couple of things on this, Chair?
Sure.
So in regards to the transit occupancy tax, it has nothing to do with the CARES Act funding. That's revenue, and I just mentioned a little bit ago, this funding cannot be used to offset revenue. So that is a loss that we will absorb. We'll have to deal with that through the budget process. So as we talk about revenue, and I'm sure Mr. Shad explained this already, this does not offset revenue loss. I can't be clearer than that. What it is for and what the eligible uses are for response to expenditures related to the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I'm concerned with the supervisor's understanding of even PPP and what it could be used for. As a business that went after that, I'll let you know that there were very, very few businesses in Del Norte County that even qualified for the PPP funds. And even once they did qualify, they had to have employees that money went to. As you recall, Supervisor, the issue with PPP is it was to be spent on employees that were essentially laid off of work. And if they didn't have those employees that were essentially being laid off of work for the coronavirus reasons, those dollars could be spent on utilities and rent and one other item. However, most businesses here in our community didn't even qualify for that. So I'm not seeing the connection. If you were a hotel and had to close, all of a sudden you have no rents. You have no TOT coming in, which comes to us, but you got nothing to pay the bill. PPP didn't take care of that, and there was no other program offered by the federal government that did support the losses of revenue for that 3 months. So getting us back to whole, however you describe it, didn't occur. We still have a shortfall, not only the businesses in our community, but in addition, our government, which, oh, by the way, we're trying to fund in perpetuity going forward with a 1% increase that helps support public safety, which you so advocated for every time we've come together at this board meeting. So I do scratch my head because I believe your understanding of these issues is far from clear. And I'll continue correcting you as those issues come about.
And you're a real fiscal watchdog, Supervisor. Appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime.
The Chairman, are you looking for a motion to, let's
am.
get back to the CARES Act and? an
Yeah, I am.
understanding that-
I'm looking for a motion to approve the expenditure plan and priorities.
I'll make that motion for item number 13 on the CARES Act to help fund the losses that we incurred for the additional expenses that we incurred due to COVID-19.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, I got a motion by Supervisor Cowan, seconded by Supervisor Berkowitz. If there's no other further discussion, Kylie, would you call the vote, please?
Chair, I would ask for public comment.
Didn't I already do public comment? I thought I did that first. I'm sorry.
I'm
Yeah,
not
go ahead.
sure. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's, do we have public comment?
Yes, it's Linda Sutter. She's raised her hand again, and I do recall she did already speak on this item.
Correct.
Yeah, I think I already called for
Sorry.
public.
You did, Supervisor.
I apologize, Chair.
All right, thank you. So would you poll the vote, please?
Supervisor Gitlin,
Yes.
Supervisor Howard,
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz,
Yes.
Supervisor Cowan,
Yes.
Chair Hemmingson.
Yes. Okay, Kylie, how'd we do? We get through everything?
Everything's good.
All right, so we will adjourn. Our next meeting is September 8th. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.
You too.